2025. And that at the heart of this issue is the private sector. Now, a group of private sector players actually met on the sidelines of the Africa Climate Summit to work on ways to increase the role of the private sector in climate mitigation, particularly climate financing, under the theme of driving green growth and climate finance solutions for Africa and the world. The meeting comes at a time when fiscal commitment to mitigate against climate change continued to be met, with the COP28 president-designate Sultan Al Jaber pledging $4.5 billion, while the Africa Development Bank committed $25 billion in climate finance by 2025. Jimmy Mbogo was at that particular private sector deliberation and joins us with more.
Well, thank you very much, and a very good afternoon to you too, Nyakundi. We are still on the sidelines of the Africa Climate Summit, just looking at the role of the private sector, and particularly in terms of investment. How much investment can the private sector contribute? Again, the issue of climate financing continues to be a huge conversation and a lot of opportunities within that space. Now, this breakfast that was happening here was, of course, chaired, particularly spearheaded by Equity Bank, of course, one of the key institutions in the country, and we just want to have that conversation with Dr. James Mwangi on how do we best de-risk the continent, and also just looking at the opportunity for investment for local banks, even as we try and continue to see how that conversation around changing the multilateral financial institutions, how that is going to go, and the kind of fruits that will be bear that process will bear, even as we wait for the Nairobi Declaration. Dr. Ari, thank you so much for making time, particularly to speak to KTN. So one of the things that we want to understand is we've been having a conversation around de-risking the African continent. And yesterday in the president's speech, one of the things that he touched about is the continent, and particularly the global south, paying upwards of five times more when you're getting capital from the multilateral institutions. So what needs to happen, and what role do local banks have to play in that?
Thank you very much. There is a huge opportunity of restructuring the global financial systems. The financial system has not been providing a level playing field. It is true, African risk has been elevated through imagination, and as a result, Africa pays up to 6 times what the rest of the developed world, and hence increases the cost of development in Africa 5 times in terms of interest expense, and as a result makes Africa less competitive. And this is what the African Union, using the African Climate Summit being held in Nairobi, the Nairobi Accord, is intended to address. Call on to the world to the table and say, as we talk about climate change, let's talk about the financial structures, and let's create climate financing institutions that provide de-risk Africa from the high interest expenses.
All right, again, Dr. This is the question of, and this is something that even again was touched yesterday by the president, the question of value addition and the amount of opportunities that are in that particular sector, because Africa has the raw materials, yet still we're not getting enough investments that can be able to export, can see the continent maybe export finished products.
Africa has been only contributing 3% of manufacturing in the world. It has only been contributing 3% of finished product exports around the world. And as a result, it has only been contributing 2% of global emissions. This really shows how Africa has not played in value addition in the manufacturing sector. Yet when you look at the resources or factors of production, Africa has 65% of the utilized arable land. That land needs to be utilized, but not to be utilized the way we have utilized land in the past, where we grow raw materials and export them as raw materials. We're saying let's the value addition be on the African continent. To take one manufacturing resource that we can take is the green strategic minerals that are used to build batteries, are built to use copper or electrical wires that is used to do green hydrogen technologies. That resource, Africa has 40%. As of today, Africa earns only $11 billion for exporting that resource. Out there, the world, there are countries that add the primary layer of value addition. They earn $50 billion. But those who do the finished products earn $7 trillion US dollars. So the call yesterday by the president is, let's do the finished product using our raw materials, using the labor of our youth. We create employment, we export finished products, we create revenue in form of taxes so governments can meet their obligation, while at the same time retaining the wealth in Africa and dealing with our challenge of poverty.
All right, so Nyakundi, before I hand it over back to you now, we are joined by Rose Ndwati. She was in charge of the document that we've just seen the private sector signing, and we just want to understand what are some of the things that were captured in that document, and particularly why was it necessary to have the private sector players sign this document. Rosa, thank you so much for speaking to KTN. So take us through some of the issues that you have highlighted on that document, and why was it necessary to have the private sector put pen to paper?
We have been in touch with the team that has come up with that is coming up with the Nairobi Declaration. So the statement by the Africa private sector comes alongside that declaration and covers the same issues so that we make sure there is no misalignment. So issues such as climate funding have been covered, issues such as decarbonization have been covered, issues such as sustainability and reporting, the issue of green minerals, and what we are asking the private sector is to make sure that they also stand up to be counted and come up with smart goals around each of these issues of what they are committing to do as individual companies, and then together public sector and private sector can then make even a greater impact.
Do you have a specific figure or a cumulative figure that all these companies and the private sector has agreed to?
So what the private sector will do immediately they sign the declaration and the statement is they will each go back and come up with smart goals that have specific measurements, including figures. We want two types of figures, percentages and amounts, on what each of the companies is going to do as an individual company. And those figures will be then sharing with the whole community.
All right, thank you so much. And of course, we'll be looking forward to some of those numbers and the details that the private sector will be committing to. And of course, Nyakundi, these are conversations that is not about to end now. You'll remember that COP28 is also coming later in the year. And of course, these conversations are just gearing up, and having the continent and particularly the private sector across the continent speaking with one voice definitely gives them a higher bargaining power. And we'll see what is the net effect of that. But for now, back to you.
All right, I'm foreseeing Jimmy joining us on the glasses panel. Seeing me as Nyakundi, but I understand Nyakundi, my colleague, will be here tomorrow tackling matters to do with energy and how it touches these deliberations, the Nairobi Declaration, how energy is at the core of this issue of climate summit in Africa. Well, right now we want to take a short break. When we come back, still have more for you in regards to people who are